Hi everybody, welcome to this presentation about evaluating informational sources. We want to make sure that our students can determine which source of information are more reliable to use. Let's evaluate two sources together using a topic from my 8th grade science class. The topic I'm going to use to show you an example is natural selection, adaptation, and variation. This is a topic covered in the Earth Science, Earth History, and Diversity of Life unit provided by the South Carolina Department of Education. This topic is important to my curriculum because this is the basis of evolution, and using concepts such as natural selection and adaptation, this can show students the process of evolution is a natural process, and it can also reduce controversy that surrounds the topic. You might be asking yourself, what is natural selection, adaptation, and variation? Well, natural selection is a concept introduced by Charles Darwin that explains how species adapt to survive and reproduce over a long period of time. You've probably heard of this as survival of the fittest. Natural selection can occur through adaptation or variation. And an adaptation is a trait or behavior that's genetically acquired over time to better equip a species for survival and reproduction. This is not a random mutation. Variations are changes in the actual genes that can be inherited, and these can be through adaptation, or it could be a random gene mutation. With such a difficult science topic, we need to make sure that we have good references. The first reference we're going to evaluate to see if it's suitable is from the Office of Standards and Learning, which is under the South Carolina Department of Education. This office has created a document in a PDF format that shows teachers a model curriculum, and it includes the units by grade level. It gives the standards, performance indicators, science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts, and also suggested activities for each performance indicator. If you look to the right for Table 1, it does show each unit by the grade level. They are all clickable links. I've circled the 8th grade for you, and you can see the blue arrow, which is pointing to the Earth Science and Earth History and Diversity of Life unit. After reading through the model curriculum and seeing the suggested activities, I know that this is probably a credible resource, and there are 4 reasons that I listed here for you to see why I think it's credible. First of all, it's provided by State Department of Education, and it's a .gov site, which is more reliable than a .com or another site where we're not sure who the author is for the content. Second, the references provided include university and scientific organizations, and those are also government agencies or .edu sites where we know that the authors are experts in their field. The references are cited in an APA format, suggesting that this is more of a scholarly website. And also the number of references were reasonable for fact-checking and for the amount of work in this model curriculum. And since it came from the Office of Standards and Learning, we know this was written by a professional team of authors. Well, now that we know that the South Carolina Department of Education website is a credible source, we're going to look at our second source, which is Wikipedia. And we've all heard of Wikipedia, and we all know that our teachers, when we were in school, told us not to use Wikipedia because it wasn't a reliable source. Well, Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia that does allow anyone to create or modify an entry, and this is why it could be some misinformation because experts are not writing in Wikipedia. However, as time has gone on, Wikipedia has become a more reliable and a more accepted source of information in the classroom. And this is mostly due to the fact that they have hired some experts to wade through the information and verify it, and also they have a team of volunteers that help as well. So teachers and librarians feel a little bit more comfortable with students using Wikipedia as a jumping off point when doing research. So when I was using Wikipedia to do some research on adaptation, natural selection, and variation, I found some strengths and weaknesses to share with you about Wikipedia. First, with the strengths, one thing I really liked is there is a listed table of contents that is all clickable links that made a much quicker search when I was looking for certain information. It provides text and it provides pictures. It does name references at the bottom of the page, and it does give you further reading information so that you can fact check pretty quickly if need be. The information is pretty straightforward because it isn't written in a scholarly language. It's written in everyday language by everyday people. The most popular topics that are related to middle school curriculums are included in this entry, and we can see things such as pictures of peppered moths and Darwin's finches. All right, now on to the weaknesses. One, the entry addresses a natural selection in relation to it only happens to individuals, and that makes it sound like humans, whereas actually it happens to all organisms. So that word individual, there could be one of those places where the editor might want to change that word. Second thing I noticed is some content really seems out of place for this topic, such as number 5. Number 5 says it's called the arms race, and that to me doesn't sound like anything that has to do with natural selection. However, when you click on the link, you learn that it is related, but it's very confusing, especially for students, because this topic is already widely used and it definitely means something else. The next thing that I noticed is the organization of topics. While they were listed in the table of contents, they seem to be randomly in order, and they really don't make any sense in the order that they are in, so they really just don't flow well. Next, there's just too much information, and it's very distracting, and I think students would have a very hard time trying to narrow down the information on their own. Last, the list of references is extremely long. It does contain some reliable sources. However, with over 100 sources, you would take a very long time trying to determine if something was actually factual in this entry. If I was able to get through all of the cited sources at the bottom of the page, is that information really reliable? What I found was the information for the entries about natural selection, they are well cited and they do use text from the source of the discovery. So what I mean by that is they actually read and cite The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. He's the founder of natural selection, so you can't get any better than the original source. Also, citations have clickable superscripts, and they're really easy for you to link to the direct source for that sentence or quotation or paragraph, and so it's a lot easier to be able to navigate to the source. However, topics that seem out of place, like that arms race number 5, like we talked about before, they also have a superscript, and it does lead to good information and sources about that topic, but since the topic was just so widely out of place, those references really have no backing for natural selection, which is the topic we're trying to find reliable information on. Okay, now that we've evaluated both sources, we have to determine, are the sources in agreement, and is one actually better than the other one? Well, for these two sources, neither sources really dispute the basic facts that describe natural selection, adaptation, or variation. We do know Wikipedia really had way too much information. It had a very wide scope, included things that weren't basic. It would make it very difficult for middle school students to narrow down what would be important for their study of this topic. And for the last thing is Wikipedia is not really written for the reading level or for the fact that middle school students don't have a prerequisite knowledge of this topic, and so they really don't know where to start, and they don't know that number 5 named arms race really has nothing to do with what we're studying. So it would be very difficult for the middle school students to decipher and wade through this information. So for that fact, I think staying with the Department of Education's links and model curriculum would be a better choice. However, I do encourage students to use Wikipedia as a jumping off point for any research they do, because there are so many references to get you to where you need to go. So I don't discredit Wikipedia, but I do feel that if I'm trying to do a lesson for my students on a very difficult topic, I would stick with something with a more narrow scope, like the Department of Education's model curriculum.